It was a cold, damp night on the outskirts of town, the kind of evening where the air felt heavy with secrets, and the dim glow of streetlights barely pierced through the thick fog rolling in from the nearby woods. Officer Daniel Harper sat in his patrol car sipping lukewarm coffee from a thermos as he scanned the desolate highway ahead. This part of the road wasn't usually busy, just an endless stretch of asphalt cutting through farmland and empty fields. But tonight, something about it kept pulling at his instincts. Maybe it was the eerie silence, or maybe it was just years of experience telling him that calm nights like these often hid something unexpected. As Harper drove slowly along the shoulder, his headlights caught movement in the distance. A black vehicle was speeding down the middle lane, its taillights glowing faintly like two tiny red eyes staring back at him. At first glance, it looked harmless enough. A hearse, probably rushing to deliver someone's final remains to their resting place. But then Harper noticed how fast it was going, way too fast for a vehicle carrying such delicate cargo. He frowned and glanced at his speedometer. The hearse was easily cruising at 70 miles per hour, well above the posted limit. Harper tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Something about this didn't feel right. Hearse drivers were usually cautious, respectful even, given the somber nature of their work. Speeding recklessly seemed out of character. His gut told him to investigate further. Flipping on his sirens, he accelerated until he was close enough to signal the driver to pull over. The hearse slowed reluctantly, eventually coming to a stop on the side of the road. Harper parked behind it, leaving plenty of space between the two vehicles. He stepped out of his car, adjusting his hat against the chill. The fog swirled around him, muffling the sound of his boots crunching against the gravel. As he approached the hearse, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was no funeral home logo on the side of the vehicle. No markings of any kind. Just plain black paint, sleek and polished, almost unnervingly so. It gleamed under the flickering light of his cruiser's roof bar, giving it an almost otherworldly appearance. The driver's window rolled down slowly, revealing a man in his late 40s. His face was pale, almost ghostly, and his hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. "Evening, officer," the man said, his voice shaky but polite. Harper nodded curtly. "License and registration, please," he replied, his tone firm but not unkind. The man fumbled inside his jacket pocket before producing the requested documents. Harper glanced at them briefly. The name read Jerry Langston, and everything appeared to be in order, at least on paper. "What's the hurry?" Harper asked, leaning slightly into the open window. Jerry hesitated, his gaze darting nervously toward the rear of the hearse. I got a call from the funeral home," he stammered. "They needed me to bring this delivery ASAP. Said there'd been some mix-up with the schedule." Harper raised an eyebrow. "A mix-up?" he echoed skeptically. "At this hour? Seems unusual." Jerry nodded vigorously, beads of sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool temperature. Yeah, I know it sounds strange, but they insisted. Told me if I didn't get there soon, they'd have to delay the service tomorrow. You know how families can be when things don't go according to plan?" His voice trailed off, and he forced a weak smile. Harper studied him carefully. Something about Jerry's story didn't add up. For one thing, hearses rarely traveled alone at night unless absolutely necessary. And for another, the man's nervous demeanor set off alarm bells in Harper's mind. Most drivers pulled over by cops were irritated or annoyed, but Jerry seemed genuinely frightened, as though he had something to hide. "Pop the trunk," Harper instructed suddenly, pointing toward the rear of the vehicle. Jerry froze, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. The trunk?" he repeated, his voice cracking. "Why do you need to see that?" "It's standard procedure," Harper lied smoothly, keeping his expression neutral. Truthfully, he hadn't planned to check the coffin until now, but Jerry's reaction only deepened his suspicions. If the man had nothing to worry about, why was he acting so jumpy? Reluctantly, Jerry stepped out of the hearse, his movements slow and deliberate. He walked around to the back of the vehicle, his fingers trembling as he pressed the button to release the latch. The door creaked open, revealing a long rectangular coffin resting inside. It was ornate, made of polished mahogany with intricate carvings along the edges. Harper shone his flashlight onto it, examining every detail. Everything seemed normal. Too normal, in fact. "I'll need you to open it," Harper said evenly, crossing his arms over his chest. Jerry's face went completely white. "Open it?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. But it's sealed. I'm not supposed to." "That's an order," Harper interrupted sharply. "Unless you want me to call for backup and make this more complicated than it needs to be." Jerry swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. For a moment it looked like he might argue, but then he sighed heavily and reached for the screws holding the lid in place. Each twist of the screwdriver echoed loudly in the stillness of the night, amplifying the tension hanging in the air. Harper watched silently, his hand hovering near the holster of his gun, ready for anything. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the last screw came loose. Jerry hesitated, his hands hovering uncertainly over the lid. "Go on," Harper urged, his voice steady but laced with authority. With a shaky breath, Jerry pushed the lid upward, revealing what lay inside. The lid of the coffin creaked open, and Officer Daniel Harper leaned forward, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness inside. His heart was pounding now, though he tried to keep his expression calm and professional. Whatever he expected to see, whether it was a body wrapped in pristine white cloth or perhaps some harmless cargo disguised as remains, it wasn't this. Inside the coffin, illuminated by the harsh glare of his flashlight, lay a young woman. She wasn't lifeless. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths, and her wide, terrified eyes locked onto Harper's face. Her mouth was gagged with duct tape, muffling any cries for help, and her wrists were bound tightly with rope. For a moment, Harper froze, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. He had seen plenty of strange things during his years on the force, but nothing like this. "Step away from the vehicle?" Harper barked sharply, instinctively reaching for his gun. Jerry Langston, still standing beside the hearse, looked as though he might faint. His hands trembled uncontrollably and beads of sweat dripped down his forehead despite the cold night air. "Officer, please," Jerry stammered, backing away slowly. "It's not what it looks like, I swear." Harper ignored him, focusing instead on the woman in the coffin. He holstered his weapon and carefully reached in to remove the gag covering her mouth. As soon as the tape came off, she gasped for air, choking slightly before managing to speak. "Help me," she whispered hoarsely, her voice barely audible over the sound of her ragged breathing. Harper nodded quickly, trying to reassure her. "You're safe now," he said firmly, even though he wasn't entirely sure that was true yet. He turned back to Jerry, who was now leaning against the side of the hearse, looking like he might collapse. "Who is she?" Harper demanded, his tone icy. Jerry opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. Instead, tears began streaming down his face. "I didn't want to do this," he muttered finally, his voice cracking under the weight of guilt. "They made me." "Who made you?" Harper pressed, stepping closer. "Who are they?" Jerry hesitated, glancing nervously toward the open road behind them. It was clear he wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. Harper stood between him and freedom, and the flashing lights of the patrol car ensured that any attempt to flee would be futile. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Jerry spoke again. It's a delivery service," he admitted quietly, avoiding Harper's gaze. "But not for bodies. For people." Harper's stomach churned at those words. People? What kind of twisted operation was this? Before he could ask more questions, the young woman in the coffin started speaking again, her voice trembling with fear. "Please don't let him take me back," she pleaded, her eyes darting frantically between Harper and Jerry. "They'll kill me if they find out." Harper knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "What's your name?" he asked softly, doing his best to keep his tone reassuring. She hesitated for a moment before answering. "Emily," she whispered. My name is Emily Carter. All right, Emily, Harper said firmly, turning his attention back to Jerry. Tell me everything now. Jerry slumped against the hearse, defeated. He wiped his face with shaking hands and took a deep breath before beginning his story. I owe money, he confessed bitterly. A lot of money, to people I shouldn't have borrowed from. When I couldn't pay them back, they gave me options. This was one of them. He gestured vaguely toward the coffin. They said all I had to do was drive, pick up packages and drop them off where they told me to. No questions asked. Harper clenched his jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Packages, he repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. Is that what you call her? A package? Jerry flinched but didn't argue. I didn't know what else to do. He mumbled miserably. They threatened my family, my kids. I couldn't risk losing them. Harper shook his head in disgust. While he understood desperation, it didn't excuse participating in something so vile. Where were you taking her? He demanded. Jerry hesitated again, clearly torn between loyalty to his captors and fear of further punishment from the law. But when Harper took a step closer, his hand resting conspicuously on the grip of his holstered firearm, Jerry cracked. To a funeral home, he admitted. At least, that's what they told me. They said nobody would suspect anything because who checks coffins? But it's not really a funeral home, it's just a front. A place where they hold people until they figure out what to do with them next. Harper's blood ran cold. Hold people? What exactly did that mean? Were there others like Emily being transported in similar ways? The thought sent a shiver down his spine. He needed answers, and fast. Turning his attention back to Emily, Harper asked gently, Do you know anything about these people? Where they're keeping others? Emily hesitated, her lower lip quivering. I've been moved around a lot, she admitted quietly. Different places, always dark, always scary. Sometimes I heard voices, people talking about shipments and schedules. There's more than just me, I think. Lots more. Harper's mind raced. This wasn't just a random kidnapping, it was part of something much bigger, a network operating right under everyone's noses. And if Jerry was telling the truth, then the so-called funeral home was likely just one piece of a larger puzzle. All right, Harper said, straightening up and pulling out his radio. Jerry, you're coming with me. You're going to tell me everything you know, starting with addresses, names, and any details you can remember. And Emily, he glanced back at her, offering a small, encouraging smile. You're safe now. We're going to get you somewhere warm and secure, and we'll make sure whoever did this pays for it. As Harper called for backup and arranged for medical assistance for Emily, he couldn't shake the feeling that this case was far from over. If Jerry's confession was accurate, then uncovering the full scope of this operation would take time, resources, and careful planning. But one thing was certain. Harper wouldn't rest until every last person involved was brought to justice. For now, though, his priority was getting Emily to safety and making sure Jerry didn't slip through the cracks. After securing Emily in the warmth of his patrol car and ensuring she was wrapped in a blanket to ward off the night's chill, Officer Daniel Harper turned his full attention to Jerry Langston. The man sat slumped on the curb, his head bowed, low, his hands clasped tightly together as if in prayer. He looked broken, defeated, but Harper knew better than to let sympathy cloud his judgment. Jerry had been part of something monstrous, and while he might not have pulled the strings himself, he'd played a role in perpetuating it. Harper crouched down in front of him, his voice firm but measured. Jerry, he began, you've got two choices here. You can cooperate fully, with no lies, no omissions, or you can go straight to jail tonight and wait for the courts to decide your fate. Either way, this isn't ending well for you. But if you help us stop whoever's behind this, maybe, just maybe, you'll get a chance to make things right. Jerry raised his head slightly, his bloodshot eyes meeting Harper's. For a moment he seemed to consider resisting, but then reality sank in. There was no escape now. His shoulders sagged further and he nodded weakly. Okay, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I'll tell you everything I know. With backup arriving and paramedics tending to Emily, Harper led Jerry back to the patrol car. He grabbed a notebook from the glove compartment and flipped it open, ready to jot down every detail. The foggy night stretched endlessly around them, the world outside feeling eerily silent as though holding its breath. "Start from the beginning," Harper instructed. "How did you get involved with these people?" Jerry took a shaky breath before launching into his story. "It started about 6 months ago," he explained. "I lost my job at the warehouse when they shut it down. I tried finding work, but nothing stuck. Then I got desperate. I borrowed money from some guys I shouldn't have. Loan sharks. At first it wasn't so bad. They gave me extensions, said I could pay it back over time. But when I missed a payment..." He trailed off, swallowing hard. "Let's just say they don't take kindly to late payments." Harper nodded grimly. "And that's when they offered you this job?" Jerry nodded. "Yeah. They told me it was easy. Just drive their vehicles from point A to point B. No questions asked. At first I thought it was legit. Maybe they were smuggling booze or cigarettes, you know? Something illegal, but not like this." He gestured toward the hearse, his expression haunted. "When I realized what they were really doing, it was too late. They said if I backed out, they'd come after my family. So I kept driving." Harper scribbled furiously in his notebook, piecing together the fragments of Jerry's confession. "What about the funeral home?" he asked. "Where is it?" "It's not far," Jerry replied. "About 20 minutes from here, near the old mill district. It's called Resting Pines Funeral Home, but it's a fake. Just a cover. That's where they keep the people they bring in until they figure out what to do with them." "What happens next?" Harper pressed. "Where do they go after that?" Jerry hesitated, his gaze dropping to the ground. "Some of them disappear," he admitted quietly. "Others are sold off, to who I don't know. Overseas maybe, or rich families looking for servants. I never asked, officer, I swear. All I did was drive." The implications of Jerry's words hit Harper like a punch to the gut. Human trafficking. It was one of the darkest crimes imaginable, preying on the vulnerable and turning human lives into commodities. And judging by the scale Jerry described, this operation was vast, spanning multiple states, or even countries, but there was still more to uncover. "Did you ever hear names?" Harper asked. "Anyone giving orders, bosses, contacts?" Jerry shook his head. "Most of the time, I dealt with middlemen, guys who didn't know much themselves, but once..." He paused, frowning as if trying to recall something important. "Once I heard someone mention a name. Elias. I think he's the boss, or at least high up. He's the one who gives the final orders." Harper jotted down the name, underlining it twice. If this Elias was indeed the ringleader, tracking him down would be key to dismantling the entire network. But finding him wouldn't be easy, not without solid leads. As Jerry continued talking, providing bits and pieces of information about routes, drop-off points, and methods of communication, Harper couldn't shake the image of Emily lying terrified in the coffin. She wasn't alone. There were others out there trapped in similar situations, waiting for someone to save them. Every second counted. Back at the station, Harper worked tirelessly alongside detectives to piece together the puzzle. Using GPS data extracted from the hearse, they traced its movements over the past few weeks, identifying patterns and potential locations tied to the operation. Meanwhile, Emily provided additional details during her interview, describing warehouses, vans, and faces she'd seen during her captivity. Her courage amazed Harper. Despite everything she'd endured, she remained determined to help bring her captors to justice. By morning, they had a list of targets. One address stood out: an abandoned factory on the edge of town, listed as a frequent stop for the hearse. Harper knew it was risky. A raid could spook the traffickers, causing them to scatter. But they couldn't afford to wait. Lives were at stake. Calling in reinforcements, including SWAT teams and federal agents alerted to the case, Harper prepared for what promised to be one of the most dangerous operations of his career. As he suited up, strapping on his bulletproof vest and checking his weapon, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. This wasn't just about catching criminals anymore. It was about sending a message that no matter how deep the shadows ran, light would always find a way in. The convoy of police vehicles rolled out just before dawn, their engines rumbling softly as they approached the factory. Fog still clung to the air, wrapping the scene in an eerie haze. Officers moved in silently, surrounding the building and cutting off any possible escape routes. Inside, they found exactly what Emily had described: rows of coffins stacked against the walls, some empty, others containing frightened victims who had been drugged to appear lifeless. One by one, the captives were freed, their faces registering disbelief and gratitude as they realized they were finally safe. Paramedics rushed in to tend to those in need, while officers secured evidence and rounded up suspects caught red-handed. It was a victory, but not a complete one. During the chaos, several individuals managed to slip away, including a man matching the description of Elias. Standing amidst the commotion, Harper clenched his fists in frustration. They'd struck a major blow to the operation, but the fight was far from over. Somewhere out there, the mastermind behind it all was still free, and Harper vowed to track him down, no matter how long it took. For now, though, he allowed himself a small smile. Dozens of lives had been saved tonight thanks to Emily's bravery and Jerry's reluctant cooperation. Justice might be slow, but it was coming, and Harper intended to see it through to the end. The raid on the abandoned factory had been a whirlwind of activity, adrenaline and relief. Dozens of victims were rescued, their faces etched with exhaustion but also flickers of hope as they realized they were finally safe. Officers worked tirelessly to document evidence: stacks of coffins, restraints, sedatives, and cryptic ledgers filled with names, dates, and locations. It was clear that this operation wasn't just local. It spanned across state lines and possibly even international borders. But despite the success of the raid, one glaring fact remained: the ringleader, Elias, had escaped. Officer Daniel Harper stood near the entrance of the factory, watching as paramedics loaded victims into ambulances. His mind raced with questions. Who was Elias? Where had he gone? And how could someone orchestrate such a vast network without leaving more traces? Harper knew that catching him wouldn't be easy. Men like Elias didn't rise to power by being careless. They surrounded themselves with layers of secrecy, operating through intermediaries and cutting ties whenever necessary. Still, Harper refused to let him slip away. Back at the station, Harper gathered his team in a cramped conference room. Maps, photos, and documents covered every available surface. The whiteboard at the front listed everything they knew so far: key locations, vehicle registrations, aliases, and fragments of conversations overheard during interrogations. At the center of it all was the name Elias, circled multiple times for emphasis. "We've got enough to dismantle part of this operation," Harper began, addressing the group. "But we need to go deeper. If we don't find Elias, this will happen again somewhere else. These people are too organized, too dangerous to ignore." One of the detectives raised a hand. "What about Jerry?" she asked. "He mentioned hearing the name, but not much else. Can we use him to draw Elias out?" Harper shook his head. "Jerry's scared stiff. He's cooperating because he knows it's his only shot at redemption, but I doubt he has direct contact with Elias. Even if we pushed him, he doesn't have the information we need." Another officer chimed in. "What about the ledger we found at the factory? There has to be something useful there." Harper nodded, picking up the worn notebook from the table. Its pages were filled with scribbles, coded entries that looked like random numbers and letters at first glance. But buried within those codes were patterns waiting to be deciphered. Harper handed the ledger to a tech specialist. "Crack this," he instructed. "I want to know where these shipments were going and who was receiving them." As the team dispersed to follow various leads, Harper focused on piecing together the bigger picture. Using GPS data from the Hearse and other vehicles linked to the operation, investigators identified several recurring destinations outside the city limits. One location stood out: a remote warehouse near the docks, often used for shipping containers, destined for overseas ports. It was a long shot, but Harper couldn't shake the feeling that it might lead them closer to Elias. Late that night, Harper drove to the docks alone, needing time to think. The rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the shore provided a strange kind of solace. He replayed the events of the past few days in his mind. The terrified look in Emily's eyes when she begged for help. The haunted expression on Jerry's face as he confessed his role. The sheer scale of evil uncovered at the factory. Each moment fueled his determination to see this through. The next morning, the tech specialist returned with a breakthrough. After hours of analysis, they cracked the code in the ledger. The entries corresponded to specific dates, drop-off points, and cargo descriptions, coded references to human beings. One entry stood out: a shipment scheduled to leave the docks in 3 days, bound for an undisclosed destination overseas. Harper's heart sank. If they didn't act quickly, dozens more victims could vanish forever. With time running out, Harper coordinated with federal agents and port authorities to set up surveillance at the docks. Hidden cameras and undercover operatives monitored activity around the clock, feeding real-time updates back to the station. Meanwhile, Harper dug deeper into Elias's identity, scouring databases for anyone matching the vague description provided by witnesses. Finally, a name surfaced: Elias Marquez, a shadowy figure with ties to international crime syndicates. Though details were scarce, one thing was certain: Marquez was no ordinary criminal. He was a master manipulator, pulling strings from afar while staying invisible to law enforcement. On the second night of surveillance, the team received a tip-off. A large shipping container had been loaded onto a cargo ship scheduled to depart early the next morning. Inside, according to intercepted communications, were several captives destined for unknown buyers abroad. Harper knew this was their chance to strike, but it had to be done carefully. Any misstep could jeopardize the mission and endanger the lives of those inside the container. Under cover of darkness, a covert team moved in, surrounding the ship and cutting off access to the gangplank. Armed officers stormed aboard, moving swiftly and silently through the maze-like corridors below deck. What they found chilled them to the bone: a cramped, airless container packed with terrified men, women, and children. Some were unconscious, drugged to keep them compliant. Others cried out in fear, unsure whether their rescuers were friend or foe. As paramedics rushed in to tend to the survivors, Harper scanned the crowd, searching for any sign of Elias. But once again, the elusive leader was nowhere to be found. Instead, officers discovered a briefcase containing documents and encrypted devices, potential clues to unraveling the rest of the network. Harper seized the opportunity, handing the items over to cybercrime experts for further analysis. Though Elias remained at large, the raid at the docks dealt a crippling blow to the trafficking ring. Cargo ships were impounded, assets frozen, and key players arrested. News of the takedown spread quickly, drawing national attention to the case. Families of missing persons came forward desperate for answers, and slowly, connections began to emerge. Victims identified their captors, leading to additional arrests and seizures of properties used as holding facilities. For Harper, however, the fight was far from over. Every new piece of evidence brought him closer to Elias, but the man seemed always one step ahead. It was as if he existed in the shadows, slipping through cracks that shouldn't exist. Yet Harper refused to give up. He spent countless hours poring over case files, analyzing patterns and following leads no matter how small. His dedication inspired his team, who worked tirelessly alongside him, united by a shared goal: justice. And then, just when it seemed like the trail had gone cold, a breakthrough arrived. Cybercrime analysts cracked the encryption on one of the devices seized during the dock raid. Hidden within its files was a single email thread, a conversation between Elias and an unknown associate discussing plans to relocate operations to a new base of operations. Attached to the message was an address, a secluded estate deep in the mountains miles away from prying eyes. Harper stared at the screen, his pulse quickening. This was it, their best chance to catch Elias. Gathering his team, he outlined the plan: A coordinated assault on the estate, timed to coincide with the meeting Elias was rumored to attend. It was risky, but they had no choice. Too many lives depended on stopping him once and for all. As the sun rose on the morning of the operation, Harper felt a mix of anticipation and dread. He knew the stakes were higher than ever. Failure wasn't an option, not when so much hung in the balance. With his team assembled and ready, Harper climbed into the lead vehicle, steeling himself for what lay ahead. Justice was close now, tantalizingly within reach. All they had to do was take the final step. The journey to the secluded mountain estate was long and tense. Officer Daniel Harper sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, his eyes fixed on the winding road ahead. The early morning sun cast golden rays over the dense forest surrounding them, but there was no warmth in the air, only a heavy sense of anticipation. Behind him, a convoy of unmarked cars followed silently, each carrying officers trained for high-stakes operations. They were ready for anything. As they approached the estate, Harper reviewed the plan one last time with his team. Intelligence suggested that Elias Marquez would be meeting with several key members of his network inside the mansion. It was a rare opportunity to capture not just the ringleader, but also those who helped orchestrate the trafficking operation. Still, Harper knew better than to underestimate Elias. Men like him didn't stay hidden for so long without being prepared for every possible scenario. The estate loomed into view as they rounded a bend in the road, a sprawling, fortress-like structure surrounded by towering iron gates and dense woods. Security cameras perched atop the walls scanned the perimeter constantly, their lenses glinting ominously in the sunlight. Harper signaled for the convoy to stop just out of sight, ensuring they wouldn't alert anyone inside prematurely. Stealth was critical. A small team of tech specialists worked quickly to disable the cameras using signal jammers while others positioned themselves strategically around the property. Harper led the main assault group, moving cautiously through the underbrush, until they reached the gate. With a swift motion, the lock was cut, and the team slipped inside undetected. The mansion was eerily quiet as they approached, its grandeur masking the sinister activities taking place within. Harper signaled for silence, holding up 3 fingers to indicate the countdown. When he dropped the final finger, the doors burst open and officers streamed inside, weapons drawn. The element of surprise was on their side, for now. Inside, the opulence of the mansion clashed sharply with the horrors it concealed. Lavish furniture adorned the rooms, expensive artwork hung on the walls, and crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead. But beneath this facade of wealth lay evidence of the dark trade. Documents scattered across tables, maps marked with routes, and even a ledger identical to the one found at the factory. Officers fanned out, securing each room systematically. Then came the sound of voices from upstairs. Harper gestured for his team to move quietly toward the source. Reaching the second floor, they found themselves outside a set of double doors, slightly ajar. Through the crack, they could see a group of men seated around a large mahogany table, deep in discussion. At the head of the table sat a man whose presence commanded attention. His sharp features, piercing gaze, and confident demeanor left no doubt. This was Elias Marquez. Harper gave the signal and the team stormed the room. "Police! Hands where we can see them!" Harper barked, his voice cutting through the sudden chaos. The men froze, their faces registering shock before turning, pale with fear. Chairs scraped against the floor as they raised their hands slowly, some trembling visibly. Elias, however, remained calm, almost unnervingly so. He leaned back in his chair, studying Harper with an unreadable expression. "Well, well," Elias said smoothly, his tone dripping with mockery. "Looks like you've caught me red-handed, officer. Congratulations." Harper stepped forward, his gun trained squarely on Elias. "It's over," he said firmly. "You're done running." Elias smirked, raising his hands lazily. "Am I? Or is this just another chapter in my story?" His arrogance infuriated Harper, but he kept his emotions in check. One wrong move, and Elias might exploit any opening to escape, or worse, harm someone. Officers moved in swiftly, cuffing the men and reading them their rights. As Elias was led away, he glanced back at Harper, his smirk widening. "You think this ends here?" he taunted. "Men like me always find a way." But Harper wasn't listening anymore. His focus shifted to the victims. In another wing of the mansion, officers discovered a hidden basement filled with terrified individuals who had been held captive. Some were too weak to stand, while others clung to each other, sobbing with relief. Among them was a young boy clutching a tattered, stuffed animal, his wide eyes filled with both fear and gratitude. Harper knelt beside him, offering words of reassurance. "You're safe now," he said gently. "We're going to take care of you." The rescue brought a wave of satisfaction to Harper and his team, but they knew the fight wasn't entirely over. Elias's network was vast, and though they'd dismantled a significant portion of it, remnants still lingered. Cybercrime analysts continued working tirelessly to trace connections and identify accomplices spread across the globe. Federal agencies joined forces to track down offshore accounts and freeze assets tied to the operation. It was a monumental task, but progress was being made. In the weeks that followed, the case garnered widespread attention. News outlets covered the story extensively, highlighting the bravery of law enforcement and the resilience of the survivors. Families reunited with loved ones they thought they'd lost forever, embracing tearfully as cameras captured the emotional moments. Emily Carter, whose rescue had sparked the investigation, became a symbol of hope. She spoke publicly about her ordeal, urging others to remain vigilant and report suspicious activity. Her courage inspired countless people, including Harper, who saw firsthand how determination and teamwork could make a difference. For Harper, the experience left an indelible mark. While he took pride in bringing justice to those who deserved it, he couldn't shake the weight of what he'd witnessed. The suffering, the cruelty, the sheer disregard for human life. It reinforced his commitment to protecting the vulnerable and holding criminals accountable, no matter how powerful or elusive they seemed. Elias Marquez, meanwhile, awaited trial behind bars, his smug demeanor replaced by quiet resignation. Evidence against him mounted daily, leaving little room for denial. Prosecutors promised to seek maximum penalties, ensuring he'd never harm another soul. Though Harper knew justice wouldn't undo the pain inflicted on so many, it offered a measure of closure, a reminder that evil could be confronted and defeated. On a crisp autumn morning, Harper stood outside the precinct, watching as reporters filed into the building for a press conference announcing the conclusion of the case. The fog that had once shrouded the highways and forests during those first nights of the investigation had lifted, replaced by clear skies and fresh beginnings. Harper allowed himself a rare smile, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He turned to go back inside, pausing only to glance at the badge clipped to his belt. It represented more than just authority. It symbolized a promise to serve, to protect, and to never give up, no matter how daunting the odds. And as long as there were people willing to fight for what was right, stories like this one would have a chance at happy endings.